Hello, I'm Estelle Matthews and welcome to Food for Thought, the show that invites thought leaders and experts from the food industry to share their insights on sustainability. Meeting the needs of today without compromising the needs of tomorrow brings its own challenges, questions and opportunities. But putting people and planet at the heart of the food industry is essential for a sustainable world and business. We'll be hearing from people from all areas of food retail and groceries who've been making strides in sustainability, leading change from the front and inspiring others to do so. Join us as we listen to a variety of stories and perspectives that are food for thought.
Sustainability goals are often aimed at maintaining and improving our environment, which at their core is really aimed at improving human and planet health.
It is incredible to see these changes because without people advocating for it and asking for changes around understanding what goes into people's food, actually we would never have the information to then know what we're eating.
There is a place for technology to be able to scan the horizon to see what changes are happening in regulatory, in science, to be able to adapt and adjust.
Food and drink retailers have big ambitions when it comes to sustainability. But more often than not, it's external factors that derail them or cause substantial challenges. High on this list is regulatory change, which, if not preempted, has the power to hinder expansion, delay product, or worse still, cause recalls and damage brand reputation. Global regulatory requirements are diverse, often ambitious, and rapidly evolving. I'm Estelle Matthews, and today I'm joined by NSF's Michelle Anstey and Katie Glover to discuss what regulatory change means for the food and drink retailers and their sustainability targets. How can companies stay ahead of regulatory trends and come to view them as an opportunity rather than an obstacle? But let's start, as always, by hearing about our guests. Michelle, shall we start with you? Can you tell us a bit about your background and what led you to do the work you do today?
Yeah, thank you for the introduction. I'm Michelle Anstey. I've been in the food regulatory affairs realm for over 13 years, and most recently as at NSF here as the regulatory manager for the North American Regulatory Consulting Team. And my educational background is in molecular biology and nutrition and dietetics. And I really think that the base for regulatory careers often starts with food science, as a lot of the legislation is driven by science. And I do really love that intersection between the business side of things and science when it comes to regulatory consulting.
Thank you for that introduction. Katie, are you a food scientist? Tell us about your background.
I am, yeah. So I knew I wanted to be sort of in the food industry from a very young age, actually. I was probably textbook in terms of how I wanted to get into it. It was originally I wanted to look at sort of the sports science side of it and the sports nutrition. And actually, I then learned that the labelling side of it, and actually that interested me even more. And then, I've spent the last 10 years within food regulations, and I'm currently at NSF being the EMEA Head of Regulatory and Trading Law Manager.
Well, between the two of you, I think we've got a very, very strong balance of opinion on the topic. And of course, regulatory change is a huge, huge topic. Michelle, can you give us some background on the challenges facing the food retail business and how regulatory changes affect particularly sustainability goals?
I think it can be particularly challenging for food retailers, food manufacturers, that there are a lot of changing science and then lots of, regulations that are being introduced, some like in the U.S. at the state level, which are not preempted by federal regulations as of yet. So trying to meet the different requirements for 50 different states maybe as they come up with their own before any kind of federal preemption happens. So that can be very challenging to navigate as food retailers, and particularly if they need to go divert their inventory or have different sets of their product going to different regions, and that can obviously have sustainability impacts because at the end of the day, they may have inventory levels that are different for different regions, and if regulations come to pass, they may have to discard product before it can go into the into enforce.
And Michelle, for further context, what's currently on the regulatory horizon? Is there anything you want to kind of flag in terms of trends predicted for 2024, 2025?
I think there are a few different sustainability type regulations that are kind of on trend. In Canada in particular, the single-use plastics regulations have passed recently, and there's a lot of impact to industry for that, and the changing of even not just product on the shelf, but like the plastic bags that you check out with at the end of the grocery line. So those are high on the list, and a lot of changes to plastics in food packaging. The big in the U.S. right now is state-level regulations to prohibit PFAS or forever chemicals in packaging. So that changes how manufacturers can, package their products essentially, and driving a lot of changes and innovation too, an opportunity to improve.
Yeah, we covered a lot about PFAS in one of our previous podcasts, but it's interesting how, of course, that really highlights the differences globally and how challenging it is for businesses that operate on a global scale to actually make sure that they get it right. So let's ask Katie now about predicting regulatory trends. Is this something you can preempt for good commercial outcomes?
I think to an extent you can, but not always. So generally, local governing bodies will sort of give you their trends of what they've analysed, and they will do that via sending out surveys to, local people within each country, and they identify the trends. And, they're the ones essentially that will help the government to be guided by what regulations are going to be coming about in the next, 2 to 5 and even more so years. And I think as part of that does give us an idea. The FSA, who's the governing body for the UK, recently published their insights into what consumers are actually finding the biggest issues upon their consumer goods. And actually, other than price and, the generic things that you think are probably some of the biggest out there at the minute, but actually it's all around sustainability, and it is about understanding where that product's coming from and understanding the supply chain.
So can you adapt or pivot? Can you get ahead of the game, as it were? Again, let's get your opinion, Katie, on that, and ask Michelle afterwards.
I think to an extent, yes. I think there is the possibility of being able to get ahead of that and being able to make changes. I was actually reading not just a couple of days ago around a customer or a food manufacturer, should I say, out there that actually they admitted that their goals that they set, a couple of years ago actually were no longer applicable. And they sort of apologised in a sense to say, do you know what we thought we could do 5 years ago, we've realised that we can't. The technologies have changed, the landscape has changed, and actually, they've been honest with it, which I think is the way that people and consumers want people to be. They don't want to say, I've set these targets and then just disappear into the ether and then nobody knows what's happened with them. And actually, this was quite a large, it was a global brand actually that, held the hands up and said, we realise we have to reevaluate and have to relook at it. And I think that's what the consumers are wanting, that bit of honesty, if you can't quite cover off, what you've agreed to do.
Absolutely. So Michelle, you had there an example from Katie about technology, but on a more opportunity aspect of this question, how can technology help with future-proofing and gaining insight?
I think technology can be a very useful tool in integrating all the data that can come in. We're inundated day in day with so much data and changes that are happening that technology can help also sort through the data and put it into trends and things like that. And I think, food manufacturers and retailers can benefit from listening to the trends, consumer input. A lot of times the changing science drives consumer demand, and this happens well before regulatory changes can happen. Regulatory change is a lot of red tape, and it can take several years, and often the science predates regulatory change. So if you're listening to the science, you're using technological tools to help stay up to date, it can help you try to stay ahead of the game. But as Katie was saying, business goals can shift and trends can change faster than regulatory changes happen, or even to keep up with the science can be difficult. So just trying to calibrate the business with what's going on, and technology can help with that, I think.
So regulatory compliance can be one of the most time-consuming and cost-intensive parts of running any business. Michelle, can technology streamline this process in terms of, making it much, much easier and thinking ahead?
Yeah, I think there is a place for technology to be able to scan the horizon to see what changes are happening in regulatory, in science, to be able to adapt and adjust to those things and be on top of the ball as far as these upcoming things that are coming down the pipeline. So I think these kind of tools definitely can drive adaptability and ability to wave through the different changes.
Just adding on to that, I think it creates opportunities for innovation, but it also creates uncertainty across consumers, and that's part of it. So when you're looking at new technologies and, all you ever see in the headlines and on the news is about, these new novel foods that are coming out, or the fact that there's, they're looking at alternative proteins and, you're going to start eating crickets as part of your everyday meal, or, they're trying to create plant-based meats that are actually, are going to look almost identical. So, there's various elements of it that look identical to actual meat. And that creates a bit of a scare culture as well with the technology. So, yes, it can be really good with being able to really analyse your supply chains back to the farm all the way to the fork, but equally that consumer nervousness around, because we all know that the news can be quite scaremongering at times, and they will always publish the worst and focusing on perhaps what might actually be the relevant part of what people need to understand.
That's really interesting. I think we'll all be feeding our animals, our pets, crickets for breakfast, but that's a whole different story. How about AI itself? Again, for you, Katie, can you just tell us about what are the developments in AI as part of this topic?
Yeah, so I think as part of the AI, there's obviously sort of day-to-day tasks that have been updated that can help us, in terms of understanding the product market base, and perhaps it's understanding what's on shelf in a supermarket. So there's a well-known UK soup brand out there that actually uses AI to understand what are the consumers looking for within their soups. How are they what are their trends? What are they focusing on the most? And actually, they have said that has been super helpful. No pun intended there, sorry. But have said that that's been helpful for them to understand their consumer trends and their consumer insights. And then, on the other hand, we did a focus group as part of NSF, a part of the regulatory team, actually, to understand what our customers were thinking about AI and how they were thinking about introducing it, and what would they think about NSF introducing AI into their systems. And again, there is still quite a bit of nervousness around it. Well, how do we know that can actually do what we're asking? How do you know that information isn't going to be missed? And you can sort of say back to them, well, when there's humans doing it, there's a human error, that we're not all perfect and we can't always provide the right answers back. So it really is sort of like, on the fence. I think anybody you speak to, I've been using AI to do our goals and objectives recently, actually, which is, a brand new thing to NSF, but actually it's an interesting way that it helps you to create and maybe utilise words that you weren't using previously.
Further, if we look at NSF's solution, can you describe how it works and give us a kind of understanding into what NSF's market intelligence solution is, if people are interested?
Yeah, absolutely. So we recently partnered with a company called RegAsk, who are an AI risk intelligence-based software, or own a risk intelligence-based software. And that can help customers be able to gain entry into a new market. So it can provide them the information around regulations in terms of authorities and the claims and the labelling. It can really help them to enter that market without issues. You often hear of things that, someone's tried to get into a country and they've been unable to because it got stuck on the border because there was a piece of paper that they haven't been able to sign, or there's information on the product that actually isn't there. So part of this guidebook that's created from this AI platform that we're now using allows the client to be able to understand what are the requirements of them to get that product into those countries. So, the guidebook is a workable document. We know that giving people information at a set time is great, but actually what we then gain from this AI platform is continued updating and the horizon scanning side of it. So, if they're entering into a new market and they're wanting to understand that, it's actually, sometimes it takes a year for them to get into that new market, and regulations may have changed in that year. So, here's a snapshot, but here's a bit more information. And the AI technology really helps us to boost the information that we have been previously providing.
So, Michelle, are these emerging technological solutions robust enough? And how does NSF mitigate any challenges with this?
So I would say that technology solutions as a standalone are not robust enough, but when they're coupled with food safety, regulatory subject matter experts, these tools can be extremely powerful in delivering solutions to the food industry and to help mitigate risks. And it's this synergistic element of technology-enabled scientific experts that have the critical thinking human element that allow these technological tools to address all these food safety concerns and regulatory changes.
Essential support in a very challenging environment then. So Michelle, just how complex is the legal and regulatory landscape, and why does it pose the challenges for sustainability that we mentioned at the beginning of the podcast?
Yeah, and I think I did touch on it earlier, but the regulatory landscape is ever evolving. It's trying to adapt to updated science, and like I mentioned with the example for PFAS regulations in the U.S., you have multiple states having their own sets of regulations, which can be super confusing for food manufacturers and trying to navigate through and trying to get one answer to what they need to do for their product to be able to sell it across the whole of the country, right? And let alone country-to-country variations in these kind of requirements and trying to enter new markets. So it can be very challenging to navigate that. And, as far as sustainability goes, that poses a risk. And like I said, having to ensure you're meeting regulations before the compliance date comes into effect, managing your inventory levels to ensure that you're not having to destroy product that's no longer compliant, or packaging that needs to be swapped out and no longer utilized. These have impacts on the negative side to sustainability while trying to drive forward more sustainable products and packaging in the future.
Katie, do you have examples of businesses that have navigated this successfully and are on track with their sustainability goals?
We recently worked with a customer who actually was wanting to enter into the EU market, 13 different countries to be exact, which is more complex than I think they originally thought when we started to look at it. And actually what they were wanting to understand was around the EPR, so the extended producer responsibility around packaging. And, they wanted to understand how they could actually enter into each country, what their responsibilities were in terms of the packaging and how NSF could support that. And, I think it not only opened their eyes, I think it also, from a regulatory perspective, even though I sometimes feel like I have the knowledge of quite a lot, it really opened my eyes in terms of the requirements and the accountability that companies are now actually required to undertake in order to get these products in. I think a prime example of where perhaps companies will get confused, and this was actually a success as part of this story, so I know that's where we're trying to get to. But you can enter a product into Italy where part of the packaging is classed as being recycled, but then if you try to get it into the Netherlands, actually it's not classed as recyclable. So you think you've got this great sustainability and you're thinking, yes, I know I've got this particular packaging and I can get it into all these countries in the EU, and actually it turns out that due to complexities you can't. So we help them to navigate that and continue on their sustainability goals, and we help them to understand how they could enter both markets and cause it a success and actually end up with what they wanted to achieve out of it.
So we've heard from Katie how NSF can actually support in these areas, but thinking of actual opportunities, let's bring Michelle in here and say, how can you reach new markets and use this as a use regulatory change, if you like, as an opportunity? What are your thoughts, Michelle?
I think oftentimes regulatory changes drive companies to reevaluate their product portfolio. They have to reformulate their products sometimes to meet these requirements, and it gives them the opportunity to refresh their brand. And they can look at what the consumer trends are, and maybe along with making adjustments to meet regulatory changes, they can make changes that meet some other consumer demands or trending topics.
Food regulations vary by product and category, and I think we've already started to talk about this briefly in one of the previous answers, but by country and by state. I mean, your ingredients may be compliant, but you may also consider that you must look at the local regulations and the front of pack nutrition requirements and the use of food claims. This is a minefield, isn't it? Especially when you're dealing globally with customers.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think not all food manufacturers understand that nuance. They think that, I'm fully compliant in country A, everything's good. And they don't realize that they need to reassess for every region they enter whether all their ingredients are still compliant and permitted in that country, whether the levels need to be changed. Food additive thresholds are very different between different countries. And like you said, different countries, that's one of the other regulatory drivers or changes that are coming down the lane is these front of pack nutrition symbols. And in Canada, that's coming into effect in 2026. And these are different for different countries as well. So having to have that market insight into what the new country you're entering into, the new market you're entering into, what their requirements are, getting your formula checked to make sure that it still meets the requirements and is compliant, and ensuring that you do this well ahead of any commitments to inventory or producing product, because it could be a deal stopper to have your formula checked and find out that it's not compliant and you've already had packaging printed, which is, again, a sustainability risk to have to destroy packaging because you didn't realize you can't sell the product, things like that. So I think there's a sequence of events that should happen for companies where they do their due diligence up front, pull in subject matter experts, do some horizon scanning, get market insight into the new region, and then move forward with production and packaging and distribution.
So, Michelle, can you share a success story with us?
We do have examples of clients, and we can't really share names, but that have longstanding relationships with us that do their due diligence and look at entering new markets, engage the subject matter experts, ask for help in getting, compliance checks done, and have tapped into our market insight reporting with the AI tool, and are able to use that knowledge before they enter a market and get into it. And we are able to successfully help clients navigate those kind of minefields.
Oh, that's great. But Michelle, how can food retailers manage the kind of three considerations? So changing regulations, sustainability, and consumer safety. Do you think there are trade-offs, or can you manage all three?
I think in an ideal situation, all three of these considerations would come together and have the same end goal, because, of course, food safety is of paramount importance to consumers, and regulatory changes are aimed at delivering safe food for all people, and that's the primary outcome. And in my opinion, sustainability goals are often aimed at maintaining and improving our environment, which at their core is really aimed at improving human and planet health, which at NSF is our mission. So I think these things can be synergistic and work together. Sometimes, food safety goals may preempt or be put in front of sustainability goals, which is unfortunate, but I think that over time, with more knowledge and focus on sustainability, they're gonna come together a bit better.
Okay, so Katie, what's going to happen in the future? Are we going to have more emerging green regulations specifically?
Yeah, I think so. Just going back to what Michelle was just saying there, but out of the recalls globally, the majority of recalls are microbiological issues or recalls around allergens and the allergens that are on pack. So I think that's very clear around the 3 points you're suggesting there, that actually both of those are still a huge issue, or two of the elements are still a huge issue. So I do think, are they combined? Probably not. They're probably not recalls from the same company, but it's clear that those are definitely the two issues that people are struggling to really move forward with, and they can be easily fixed. Just checking that the allergens are on pack, or perhaps that you've got the right supply chain, is an easy solution. And then also, doing the correct testing when you're in the manufacturing site in terms of the microbiological side of it.
And Katie, if you could tell us a bit about emerging green regulations specifically, what's on the horizon?
Yeah, absolutely. So the most recent development was the EU Green Claims regulation, which was announced perhaps maybe 12 to 18 months ago now. That was on the back of a farm to fork discussion around the EU, actually. So they're the ones that then from that have looked at these EU Green Claims, and it's a fairly complex regulation that's coming, and I think it will, for those that have sustainability claims on pack, or perhaps they even have it as part of their advertising, they are really going to have to look at their processes and can they still make those claims? If there's a company out there that has been making sustainability claims for the last 3 years and all of a sudden those claims can no longer appear on pack, people will pick up on that. It's unbelievable what people are starting to notice on packaging these days. not a lot of people look at the nutrition, or perhaps, the nice pictures that are on there. Actually, a lot of people will be looking at, is it an eco product? What makes it an eco product? Especially the next generation down. That's really what's driving a lot of these changes, is they're looking for those types of information to be on pack. And there could be a risk to brand reputation, but the new directive that's actually coming in is all about, monitoring the supply chain. Companies are going to have to look at being audited to ensure that these claims are actually correct. If you make a claim on pack, you've got to really justify, and it's got to be reliable information, not just sort of the last year, but really over the last 5 years. And I think as part of what the EU are trying to do is that nobody gets a competitive advantage. So as part of this EU green claims, it is the smaller businesses that are perhaps new startups that haven't got the €250,000 to be able to pay to be able to have these claims on pack, which is roughly what they're suggesting it might cost by the time you've done all the auditing and you've done all the backlog to try and understand if that claim can be created. Is, can they help and support these smaller businesses in these countries? And that's going to have to be defined country by country. Not everybody's going to have a huge pot of money to help these, but they have to help with the competitive advantage and not let the big companies be able to be the only ones that can actually make these claims.
And is there a price barrier on that, Katie? I mean, is it possible for smaller companies to do what you're saying?
The directive seems to suggest yes. Obviously, it's a while until it comes into place, and there's a lot of the EU directive claims has been put on hold over this year because we've had a lot of political changes sort of in various countries, particularly across the EU. So in principle, yes, that's what they're suggesting, is that nobody will be left out and that everybody will have some way of being able to do this. But is that going to be the case? Only time will tell.
And that brings us nicely onto the responsibility for the next generation driving change. What impact is social media having on regulatory change, specifically in the sustainability area?
I think that they're wanting more information than ever before. When you see all these videos on TikTok and Instagram and, everybody's talking about global warming and, everything that's going on at the minute in the world. And, the next generation is technology based. I'm classed as a millennial, and we sort of had half technology, half didn't. But the next generation, and my little boy's actually Generation Alpha, and I dread to think what he might come out with as he grows up. But also, it is incredible to see these changes, because without people advocating for it and asking for, changes around understanding what goes into people's food, actually we would never have the information to then know that what we're eating, we're happy to eat, and where it's coming from, and has it flown a million miles, when we actually have animals or the products actually grown in the same country, and why we're flying it from somewhere else. And actually they're all questions that should be asked and should be challenged, and why not? And I think the next generation are really driving that forward in challenging it. And it's not just the next generation, I have to admit, there is all generations are driving it, but certainly the technology around it, the next generation are the ones that have the most knowledge to understand that.
And a hot topic on pretty much the same subject in the media right now is the call to ban pesticides. What are your thoughts on that, Michelle?
Consumers are always aware of and trying to make sure that what they are consuming and feeding their families are food safe and healthy. And I think part of that call to the media is based in that people are looking to have products that they know are safe. And, I think, from a consumer standpoint, our preference would be to have organic products and no pesticides used. But a lot of times, does that have an impact on yield and other production? And I know we have supply chain issues, we hear about them all the time. So there has to be a nice balance between meeting both those kind of requirements.
So there's got to be a middle road. One of the questions that everyone's asking at the moment is about sell-by dates for certain vegetables particularly. And I think we've all probably come across this, but where we're all throwing away edible food because we're rigidly following date labelling. Do you see stricter regulations heading our way on this globally? I mean, let's ask Katie first of all.
I don't know whether there would be regulations around it. I suspect there would be guidelines, and there would be country by country guidelines, because there's obviously a lot of testing to be had to make sure that if somebody's going to put a product on the market, that yes, it is still edible and you can go beyond the sell by date or the use by date. I'd be quite surprised, I think, if it turned into a regulation, and I'm not sure what way that regulation would go, but I certainly think there'll be guidelines from local governing bodies to really suggest how, you looked at the milk recently, so they've started to take off milk in the UK, and they're telling you to do the sniff test, and actually how many people are doing that, how many people still look at the use by date, how many people go through the milk quicker than the use by date, so actually the sniff test is no longer applicable.
I think and also just add on to that, like in Canada, we do have regulations about the best before date, and I think there's probably a piece for educating the public about what they mean, because they don't necessarily mean that the product is expired or inedible or unsafe to consume. It just gives an indication of, generally when it would be best to consume by. And sometimes those are not for food safety reasons, but they're for, sensory or quality reasons. Maybe the color will be slightly impacted after that date and so forth. So I think it's, and there should be some more education publicly to have that understanding, because as you mentioned, though, there can be a lot of food waste that goes into it, that people are afraid to consume something that has a best before date that has been passed, when it may still be acceptable to consume. And, that's a sustainability issue at its core.
We've touched on another huge topic within a very broad topic, but as a summary piece, Katie, could you just talk to us really about your advice to companies, with food and drink retailers with big ambitions to be sustainable, but how they navigate this regulatory change?
I think the one thing is to be realistic. You get a lot of companies who have big ambitions, which is great. That's what we want to hear. We want to hear that people are trying to enter into more markets and they are trying to increase their product base, and that's lovely. However, it's the realism behind what you're expecting of that product. Particularly we get a lot of products that come to us that have a million claims on, they want to get this superfood, particularly post-COVID. We're going down this whole superfood, this can help with your immune system and immune support and all this criteria. And actually, when you start to delve into that product and you start to strip away, we always get called the fun extractors, because the marketing team and everybody want this great information all on these products. And actually we sit there and we go, well, you can't have the following 5 claims. And all of a sudden the product that they're trying to get onto the market is no longer what they were hoping for. So for me, it's definitely, just taking the time to really understand. And, when we're feeding back and saying this is really black and white and this is a no-go, that is genuinely what we say. And, we'll always try and establish and let them know what the risks could be. And that's obviously on a company, whether they want to then go ahead and take that risk. That's entirely down to them. But, some regulations can be pretty straightforward, and you will get stopped at the borders, or, that product will come off shelf, and the brand reputation really, again, with social media, can be absolutely, thrown left, right and centre if you're captured with something that really shouldn't be in store.
Thanks. And Michelle, how can companies stay ahead of regulatory trends and come to view them as perhaps an opportunity?
Yeah, I think my best advice is that to look internally first, know what your capabilities and expertise are, and seek help and assistance when you don't have, I think it's impossible for any company to have global regulatory expertise in all countries and all regions. So just knowing where you have your strengths, and then looking for tools like horizon scanning tools or subject matter experts outside that can assist to navigate that minefield.
Thank you both very much. So when it comes to regulatory change in the food industry, businesses have a big responsibility, rife with complex challenges to produce safe food every day at a scale that's affordable. But whilst aiming to create a future-ready environment, it sounds like it's all about being proactive and getting ahead with support and planning, rather than scrambling to follow the rules at the last minute. There's clearly too much at stake when you're literally feeding the world.
The speaker views are their own and may not necessarily reflect the views of NSF or any of its affiliates.